Hi there, Jeep owners. Today in your 2011 Jeep Patriot, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Roadmasters InvisiBrake supplemental braking system. And this is what our braking system looks like when it's installed. The InvisiBrake is designed to install inside the vehicle, and you can just hide it in the vehicle wherever you find a location. We've decided to put ours underneath the driver's seat. That way it's easily accessible to make adjustments, and it's close enough where we were able to easily route all our wiring and necessary cables to get everything installed. The main unit here is kind of where all the action, well, most of the action happens. There's a little bit at the pedal there, and we'll be showing you that. The box here, though, this includes our pump. This also monitors the signals from the motorhome to determine if it's getting a brake signal, and when it does, the system will activate here, and it will pressurize the cylinder, bringing the pedal closer to the firewall. Our cylinder is located here next to the unit. You can see the little hose going to it there. It's hidden underneath the track as best we could to kind of keep all those components out of the way. And that cylinder there is also remote. On some of the other manufacturers' braking systems, you actually mount the cylinder on the pedal itself. And I really like those braking systems, but having the cylinder mounted on the pedal can be a little cumbersome on certain vehicles where the pedals are kind of small and close together. It can make it kind of difficult to drive the vehicle because this is a permanently installed system that's there all the time. So even when you're not flat towing your vehicle, you're just driving around town, all these parts are going to be in here. And so that's kind of where the InvisiBrake really shines. If you got a vehicle that has really just not a very good spacing between the pedals and they have very strange pedal shapes, that make it difficult to put the cylinder in a suitable location. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pedal now, and we'll show you that it has such a small amount of components attached to the pedal that won't inhibit how you drive the vehicle. And here we can see our components attached to the cylinder. And you can see here that it doesn't stick out any further than the pedal pad itself, so when you're driving like normal, even if your foot kind of touches it a little bit, you won't even really notice that it's there. With those other systems we were talking about, that cylinder sticks out pretty far, usually about this far, to a point where your foot could potentially contact it before the pedal, and that just makes it a very awkward driving experience. That can be difficult to hit the brake under certain emergency situations. This is also a manual vehicle here. You can see the clutch, which further takes up room down here, making it really not a good option on this vehicle to install one of those systems. We can see that it has a tether right here that attaches to a pulley, and that pulley is connected to the cylinder in the back. So when that cylinder activates, it pulls, and we get a nice straight cable pull using our pulley here that allows us to minimize how much components we have here. Now this system is going to be operated just off of one signal, so it's not proportional. It just activates whenever it sees a brake signal. It will shut down after the brake has been applied for a certain amount of time. So that way, if you activate like your engine brake or something like that going down a long hill, or if you even just holding the brake pedal going down a long hill, it will be able to release that so you're not just dragging the vehicle behind you the whole way. And it's important because if your brakes are applied the entire time you're using an engine brake down a hill, you could burn up the brakes on the vehicle. So Roadmaster has put a precaution in there to ensure that that situation doesn't happen. Since it's not proportional though, you do have to make sure you adjust the pressure that pulls the pedal, and everyone's going to be slightly different for each vehicle because the amount of assist and stuff the vehicle has and how hard you have to press the pedal does change. And it also matters too on how heavy your vehicle is that you're pulling behind your motorhome and how heavy your motorhome is. The smaller your motorhome and the larger your vehicle is, the more power you're going to need. But if you got a real big motorhome with a really small vehicle, you might not need as much braking power. And you can adjust that back on the main unit. So here we can see this is the pressure gauge for how much pressure that you're going to be putting out, and you can adjust that here with the knob. To make your adjustment, you'll want to pull it out, and then you can twist the knob. Once you've got your desired pressure, just push it back in to hold it in place. What I also like about the InvisiBrake system that you really can't see here just by looking at it, but the system monitors not just your brake lights, but it also monitors the tail lights, and it uses the tail light circuit on your motorhome to trickle charge the battery. So when you turn your tail lights on your motorhome and you're hooked up to your vehicle here, it'll actually go through the system here and trickle charge your battery, which is a really cool feature because some vehicles, especially on really long trips, can drain the battery down from operating the braking system and potentially from other things if depending on what type of vehicle it is in the flat tow. Our Patriot here, we don't have to worry about it, but the braking system here is still going to be using some battery power. And if you go on a long 8-hour trip without stopping or something, it's not typically recommended, but some people like to push on through. That could potentially drain this battery down, but not with the InvisiBrake. As long as you got those lights on, it's going to keep that battery charged up so you can be sure that this system's always going to activate. Here at the front of the vehicle, you also get a breakaway switch included in your kit. This installs in the system and it simply just plugs in, so I like the way they've got that set up. You get your tether cable here as well that'll hook between our switch and our motorhome, and in the event of a catastrophic disconnect where our vehicle came disconnected from our motorhome, the tether here would pull the pin, and once this pin is pulled, it activates the supplemental braking system to help your vehicle come to a safe stop. You also have a monitor light on the system, so whenever the system activates, it'll illuminate it in your motorhome, and you get a small cable here at the front that you'll use a tether to plug between your vehicle and your motorhome. So now that we've covered some of the features of our braking system, why don't you follow along with me and we'll show you how to get it installed. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a pretty lengthy install. This is something that even if you're pretty seasoned and you know what you're doing on these things, this is probably a full day job. I'd say something like this takes me between 6 and 8 hours to install. So if you're seasoned at home, I would expect it to probably be somewhere in there for you as well. If you're not very involved in working on cars very often, then it's probably going to take you longer. I would say potentially even double. So this is definitely a weekend job. Now we're going to outline all the wiring, how we routed it, where that wiring needs to go. We're also going to recommend a few different types of butt connectors and stuff to help keep everything safe along the way. So just bear with us here and you can do this at home, no problem. We'll begin our installation here inside the vehicle. The first thing that I like to do when installing these supplemental braking systems is to mount up all the larger components. That way we know where we're going to be routing all of our wiring and hoses and everything to. If we've got all the pieces there, we know exactly the path and stuff where we're going to need to take to get it to those locations. So we're going to start here. I also did want to just point out that we just put the base plate on and the front fascia of our vehicle is still off, because that's the best time to put your supplemental braking system in, is while you're doing your base plate. You've got a lot of the front end off. You can route a lot of your wires a whole lot easier. So we're going to start here on the inside though. I like to mount the main unit first, figure out where the big box goes here, because that's one of the biggest things to, the biggest parts in the kit, so it's one of the hardest things to find a suitable location for. Turns out it works out pretty nicely underneath the seat here on the driver's side. Still have plenty of foot room here for your passengers, and it fits under the seat. I do get the seat pushed all the way forward to make it easy to see and access. Now, for as far as mounting the main unit here, it actually mounts fairly easily. There's an ear that sticks out on each side. You just set your module here on the floor, and then I just took my razor knife where the ear began, and then I put a little slit in the carpet. I did the same thing on the other side, and then the ears, you just poke them into the carpet, and that holds it in place. You can see it's just held in place there by the carpet. Now for our cylinder, that also we mounted right here next to the module, and it's underneath the track right there in the corner, and we did a very similar thing to mount that up. We just made a slit in the carpet and we used a cable tie to attach it to the carpet. And right next to our module you can see the cylinder that comes in your kit. This is also a good location to mount it because you can hide it underneath the track right there. We did the same thing where we just put a slit in the carpet and we used a cable tie to attach the cylinder right to the carpet there. Now this cylinder does have a long cable that comes out the end there, and there's a pulley on it. We're actually going to be routing that underneath the carpet towards the firewall, and we'll be showing you that here in a minute. So at the other end of our cylinder, that cable that we talked about, there's an opening here in the carpet that you can run it through. It's not quite big enough though to fit that pulley through. It's got a big pulley on the end, so we did have to cut the carpet some there to be able to push it underneath the carpet and route it up towards the front. Once we pushed it through that hole here, you can see that's where it routed. I did have to pull the plastic trim piece out here to be able to pull the carpet back. The piece just pulls straight out. There is a little fastener that goes right here on the plastic panel. It's just a plastic nut. So you just twist that and pull it off of there, and then you can pull that piece out of there. There's also a piece on the floor there where your foot can kind of rest on. That piece has two pieces. It has a top piece here. This piece just pulls off, and that'll really reveal the piece below it that you see there. And this piece is screwed in, so there are two screws here removed with a 10mm socket that go on those studs there. Once you get those out of the way, the carpet just peels back like this. This is much easier to work with once you get the carpet peeled back, because we do need to keep this underneath the carpet and secure it at a couple of locations that's going to be under our carpet. So it does run up, and there you can see the pulley on the back of the firewall. Now the pulley located on the back of our firewall needs to be in a position that will give us a nice straight pull towards our brake pedal, because when the system activates, the cable will pull our brake pedal towards the firewall, activating the brakes. So it is important it's in a straight path, so that way it doesn't damage our cable and the cable rides on the pulley appropriately. So you can see we cut out a section here with a razor knife to reveal the firewall directly. And then we ran it in place with the included self-tapping screws, using a 10mm socket to run those in place. After you've got that mounted, we can mount up the section here on the pedal. And you can see that I cut this down. It is much longer than it needs to be. So the first hole that you see there, we actually skip, and then we use the second one, and the rest we cut off. Use the bolts that come in your kit to just clamp both of these pieces around your pedal. The one that has the angle on it is where our cable will attach to. So we lined this up with our pulley, so that way it's a nice straight line. You want to try to be as low on the pedal as you can. You'll get more leverage that way, and the system will work better. The higher up you go, the lower pressure you're going to be applying on the brakes, and the system won't work quite as well. This vehicle is a little bit difficult just because of the position of the pedal, so you kind of we kind of chose to do a happy medium, where we're not too high but not too low. And this nut here that you see on our end, there's another nut on the other side. There's a little opening here, so you can remove this back nut and just slide it down the cable, and then you'll pull your little tether end here up. The cable will slide through the opening, and then you'll just tighten down the two nuts to secure it in place. This is an adjustment, so you can take the end of the cable here and pull it slightly further out or further back to adjust for cable tension. We ideally want to have no tension on our brake pedal to where it's not pulling on the brake pedal, but we don't want to really have any excess slack either. So this is a pretty good spot. If you move back and forth on the cable, you can see it's not super taut, but there's not a lot of slack and flop in there. The cable then, as it goes down, this is kind of where we're part of our kind of setting it up. So I usually adjust this, the nut at the top there, to where we've got plenty of adjustment to make it tighter if we need to, but not so much to make it looser. That way we can pull this end here as tight as we can and then run it in place on the floor. After you pull it as tight as you can and run it in, then you can fine tune it with the nuts up there at the top to make it a little bit tighter or looser as necessary. And these just run in place with the two 10mm head self-tapping screws, just like the pulley. There's a little clamp that sits over top of your cable, and this comes in your kit, so don't keep an eye out on it. It's because it's a little tiny little clamp. It's just this long with two holes for the screws, and then it's just got a little collar that sits on top of the cable to hold that in place. And then we need to mount up the breakaway switch that comes in our kit, and we just attached this to the mounting location that was found on our base plate. Many of the base plates do come with a location to attach a breakaway switch, and if it's got one, that's where I would recommend attaching it. So that's what we did. We just put it right in the location that was designed for a breakaway switch on our base plate here. We used the bolt and nut that came included with the braking system and ran it on down. You'll use a 10mm wrench for the bolt and an 11mm socket for the nut. At the end of this cable is just got a quick connect end that plugs into, and this is our last major component here. So now we're going to go ahead and show you how to get all these components wired up together so everything's working properly. We're going to start back at the module that we mounted under the seat, because that's where most of the stuff kind of originates. So here we're looking at the back side of the module. I just pulled it up out of the carpet, and I guess I can show you the ear here. You can see that the ear on the one side here, I kind of had bent it down to make it more easily fit into the slit that we'd cut in the carpet there. The back side of our module here is where pretty much all of our wiring originates from, and we're going to go to all those various components to connect everything together. So starting on the one side here, this is a 6-pin connector that's got 4 wires in it. You got white, brown, green, and yellow. Those are going to tap into your diode wiring for your lighting, so that way you can get the lighting signals from your motorhome that it uses to determine when it needs to activate and how hard it needs to activate and all that. It uses that information from the motorhome to know when you're applying the brakes. Next, you've got a 4-pin connector here, and this is your power and ground, as well as for your breakaway switch at the front. And that's all of our wiring. That's all going to run underneath the carpet, just like we did with the pulley that we had mounted, and we're actually going to go through the floor to get it routed out. We're also going to route another thing out here. This is the Airline tube that comes in your kit. You'll get a couple pieces of vacuum line. The vacuum line pokes onto the module nipple, and then the Airline can poke into the vacuum line, and we can route that out to tap into the vacuum brake booster on our vehicle to ensure that we have assist. And lastly, back here, you got a small quick connect for your small Airline hose that comes in the kit, this little tiny flexible Airline hose. It just simply pokes in there install it, just poke it right in there, and you can't pull it back out now because it's a quick connect. If you did need to release it for whatever reason, you can press on the collar there. If you push inward on the collar and then pull out just like that. So I was pushing inward on the collar with 2 fingers, one on each side, and then I was able to pull it out. You kind of need to have 2 hands. And that's just if you need to reroute it, if you don't like the way it's routed or something, you can pull it out of there. And then it just pokes right back in, and when you poke it in, you can see you can't pull it out. This just routes over to the cylinder that we had mounted right here underneath the track. It has a quick connect on it as well, and we just poke it in the quick connect fit on the other side. You might want to trim it down in length. I did leave some excess there, so we can easily like move the module out if we're ever needing to move this out for whatever reason. Maybe you need to clean up a mess or something, or add more accessories or anything like that. So next we're going to go ahead and head underneath. Well, actually we'll go to the front first and we'll show you how we got the wires routed out. So everything to here that we just showed you goes through the carpet just like we did before. So here you can see where we routed them out. We did drill a hole in the floor in this location. I actually drilled it from the bottom up because it had kind of a raised section like this that I could see from down below, so I could center it in that section. And then I knew that it was going to come out in an area right here where we could easily access it, because there's really not a good grommet location here to be able to route our wires out using an existing one. So we did put our own grommet in this location. All the wires that we just talked about poke out through that hole. There's one additional circuit here that also pokes out through that hole. In your kit, you're going to get a monitor light wire, which is just a black wire that has a female bullet connector on one end and it's just bare on the other end. The bullet connector end needs to be outside. The bare wire end will stay here on this side because we're going to wire that into our stoplight switch, so that way when the brakes are pressed here in the vehicle, a monitor light will activate in the motorhome. But let's head outside. We'll come back to this wire later because there's an additional component that doesn't come in your kit that we're going to need to install, and this actually installs with that component, so we'll come back to that when we go to put that part in. So we're going to head now outside and we'll show you how we routed these wires and where they're routing to. So here we are underneath the vehicle. This is that section I told you that was raised. I drilled from this section up, and I just used a step bit to do it because the grommet here was the grommet we just had around the shop. Now there's a lot of different options. You can actually buy some grommets here at eTrailer of different sizes. I would recommend one probably of 3/4 in size, just because there's a lot of wires to pass through there. And the connector end that plugs into the breakaway switch is pretty big, so you need to go just about as large. You see all these wires here just to pass that one through, and you'll want to pass that one through first because that connector is so fat. Get that guy through first, and the rest of your wires should pass through a lot easier. So we just used a step bit, so I would say roughly the size we ended up at was probably around 3/4, and we just poked our grommet. We just drilled it up until our grommet fit snugly, and that's where we decided to stop. All of our hoses and wiring and everything here we route up towards the top of the engine compartment there, so we can easily wire everything up. And we're just going to review real quick what all we've passed through. So the 6-pin connector, there's your 4 wires on the 6-pin connector. The white, brown, yellow, and green we showed you. Next was that 4-pin flat connector. Here's the red and the black for your power circuits, and then this is the breakaway one. There's 2 wires inside of here inside of a sheathing. And then this is the Airline that's coming from the back of the unit, the thicker Airline, the bigger one. And that's all the stuff that we need out, and also our little monitor light wire here. So next we're gonna head up. I used the Airline that's in our kit here, actually is a fish wire. I poked it down from the top. I taped all my wiring here to it, and then I pulled this back up to bring my all of my wires up with it. You can just take some of this and just kind of poke it down, tape your stuff to it, and you can feed it back. This is one of the easiest ways to get all this wiring fed through such a small area, because your hand gets a little tight up in here when pushing things up through, especially when you're pushing this much stuff up through. All right, all those wires and everything comes up here. This is our Airline. We still got to hook that up. We'll show you guys hooking that in. We're going to come back to the Airline. We're going to focus on the wiring first. So our wiring here, where we come up, let's focus on the diode wiring circuits first. So that's the ones that have the white, brown, green, and yellow circuit. We're just going to pull these up here so you can see them. All right, so here we've got, you'll see 2 sets of these. You've got a set there and a set here. This set that you see here on the right is actually the diode wiring that was installed on the vehicle to make the lights at the back of the vehicle mimic that of the motorhome. And this is the wiring from our supplemental braking system. We just need to tap in to the diode wiring because the diode wiring, the way it works is it's hooked up to the front. When you plug your motorhome into it, when you hit the brakes or turn signals or anything, any of the lighting signals on your motorhome, they're going to transfer out the trailer connector on your motorhome to this wiring here to make the same lighting functions happen here on the vehicles. People behind you know your intentions. Well, the braking system here wants to see those signals because it's going to use those in its activation. It wants to know when you're pressing the brakes so it can activate the system whenever you're activating the brakes in the motorhome. And it knows that because it can see the brake light signals here. The brown circuit is also used as a charge line circuit when you got your running lights on in your motorhome. The braking system here will actually use the brown wire to trickle charge your battery, keeping it charged up going down the road. So that's why we're hooking all these up and where we're hooking them to. And we're just doing it color for color. So everything's hooked up on your diode wiring here. Take your supplemental braking system wires from your InvisiBrake and just match them up. So we can see we got white going into white, and then it just goes back to a single wire. With an exception for the white wire, we put an additional redundant ground on there since white is ground. So you can see this additional wire, it just runs over here, and it runs over to ground, just to make sure that we've always got ground here on our system. Now, but the rest of them, you can see they just go back to a single wire, and all these just route up to the connector at the front. So that's how the diode wiring needs to operate. But on the other side of our connector, we've tapped in our supplemental braking system wires. So double white, double brown, double yellow, double green. So those are pretty easy and straightforward on where they need to connect. And that's why we routed them up here into the top of the engine compartment, just to make things easier to make our connections right up here at top. Next, we've got the 4-pin connector, which had these two wires as well as the breakaway switch wire. So let's just pull those up here so we can see those. All right, so there we can see these. This is the 4-pin connector. Now the breakaway switch wire here, we're just going to route that all the way up towards our breakaway switch. But the red and the black wire here, this is our power and ground for our braking system. So we'll start with the black wire. The black wire is just going to route down. We've tucked it in down there to hide it. And it just goes up here to that same ground point. We put the ring terminal on the end of it that comes in our kit. Remove this with a 10mm socket and just screwed it back down for our ground. Now our power here, we saved this one. We haven't hooked this one up yet. This is going to connect to the fuse harness that comes in your kit. And here's the fuse harness that comes in your kit. One end of the fuse harness, you're going to put a ring terminal on and attach it to the battery positive. And we just removed the nut there with a 10mm socket, put our ring terminal on and tightened it back down. The other end of our harness here will connect to the red wire from our braking system. Now, it's important, make sure no fuse is installed when you're working, because we don't want to work with any kind of live wires. We're actually not going to install that fuse until we're fully done with our braking system, so that way there's no chance of us causing shorts. So we're going to go ahead and strip back each end of these wires so we can make our connection to the battery there. So we're just going to strip these back. Just use your strippers to strip them back. And our strippers are a little bit worn there, so it takes a couple tries. All right, so once you got them stripped, we're then just going to use a butt connector to connect them together. But I do recommend, rather than using the butt connectors that come in your kit, use a heat shrink butt connector. I also like to twist the ends just to make them poke into the butt connector easier. This one's a heat shrink, so we can shrink it down to seal up the ends since we're now outside the vehicle. Any of the circuits that you're hooking up inside the vehicle, you're fine to use the butt connectors that come in the kit because the inside of the vehicle is protected from the elements. But here on the outside, we want to use these. And this is the same method that we're going to use to attach a ring terminal. You just crimp it on just like that when you're putting a ring terminal on. Strip back the end, slide your ring terminal on there, and crimp it down just like this. Now, if you're using a heat shrink butt connector though, we want to grab our heat gun and shrink that down after we've made our connection. If you need a heat gun, you can get one here at eTrailer. Here's a nice little small one from Performance Tools. Little compact, kind of easy to use. So now all we got left is our monitor light wire and our breakaway switch wire. Both of those we were right here. We routed them through this opening here. Our fascia's off because we just put our base plate on. These are just going to come out. We go down the side of the bumper beam here to hide them behind the beam. And we just run them down the beam until we get towards the middle here. And then we bring them out the front. And we're just going to let them hang out here for now. This is the diode wiring that we'll need to finish installing once we get the fascia back on. And this connector here is actually just going to get mounted right next to the connector so they can plug in the small bullet connector into between their motorhome and their vehicle. And this is the little bullet connector cable that you get with the InvisiBrake here. So you can see that it's a female end here. You'll use a female end on both the vehicle and the motorhome side, and this is the tether that will connect the two vehicles together. All right, that pretty much wraps up all of our wiring. We've got most of that taken care of. We do have to install our vacuum line now. So this is the thicker vacuum line that comes in your kit. We routed it out through the floor, brought it up here. It needs to connect into the vacuum line for our brake booster. Our brake booster is located right there. It's that big old canister behind your master cylinder. And this is the vacuum line that's connecting to the booster. When the engine's running, it removes pressure, lowers the pressure in the booster comparative to atmospheric pressure, so it gives you an assist, makes it easier to apply the pedal. To tap into this system, we got a couple of pieces we need to put in there. We cut the line right there and we added in the T fitting that comes in your kit. The T has one smaller nipple and two larger ones. The smaller ones where we're going to be attaching our line to. The larger ones poke to the vacuum line. I did use a little bit of silicone spray on it to make it slide into there a little bit easier. So just take your line that you cut and slide it into each side there. So that way our T's in line. Then we came down a little further, maybe 6 inches down, 4 or 6 inches somewhere in there, and we cut it again. And at this point, we put in the check valve that comes in your kit. And the check valve has two colors. You got a black side, and then it has a clearish color on the other side. The clear color is going to go on the side towards your T-fitting that you put in, and the black side is going to go continue on towards the engine here. And again, I just use a little silicone spray and just push the lines onto the barbed ends. Now we need to hook up the vacuum line that comes in our kit. So the first thing we want to do is figure out how long this needs to be. So we're going to just kind of hold it up over there. This looks pretty good. That looks like a good length right there. Maybe I'll give myself about 1 inch of excess for the future, for anything like that, or for routing purposes. Now when we cut this, we have a special set of cutters we want to use when cutting this type of line. It's more important on anything that is a quick connect fitting, but it is also important on this as well. And same thing with your vacuum line. This is just a pair of hose cutters. You can see it's got a nice flat surface on one side with a very sharp blade on the other side that gives you a nice clean square cut. You can get tools like this here at eTrailer if you need some. And you can see you get a nice clean square cut there. And it's very important for any quick connect fitting because it won't seal properly unless you got a nice square clean cut like that. And ours here, we are just going to be using this Airline hose, so it's not quite as critical with this that it still should seal in there, but it is good practice to use the appropriate tools. I'm going to put a little bit of that silicone spray just inside of there, and we'll poke this onto the T-fitting. And then I'll put a little bit of silicone spray on the end of the hose here. That'll help it slide in easier into here, and then we're just going to slide these pieces together. All right. And then I'll probably use a cable tie to secure it over here just to help hold it in place in this location over here. So we're now back inside the vehicle. We've hooked up pretty much almost all the entire system here, but we have one wire we hadn't hooked up from the system, and that was that monitor light wire that we'd routed out. We hadn't hooked up this side yet. And the reason we hadn't hooked it up is because this particular vehicle, regardless of key position, the brake lights will still illuminate. And the problem with the brake lights illuminating when the brake pedal is pressed here means that when our diode wiring is activated, if you have a turn signal on and you're coming up to a stoplight and you press the brakes, if the brakes activate here, the brakes will override the turn signal, so you'll just see brake lights, you won't see the turn signal. By adding in this circuit here, it's going to remove the factory brake lights while you're in your flat toe mode. So that way you're going to only get the lighting signals from the motorhome. So that way when you do come to a stop that you got to turn, let's say you're making a left turn, you'll see your left blinker and the right signal will be a brake signal. So that way it operates the way kind of like you would expect it to, and that way people behind you will know your intentions when you're driving. So to hook in this component here, this does not come included with your kit. This is a brake light relay from Roadmaster. We're going to install this in line with the stoplight switch. Our stoplight switch is located right here, so I did remove this panel to make it easier to access. There's 2 screws that you'll remove out here. Just use a Phillips screw bit. and then this panel just pulls right off. There's a pin that goes in this slot here and one in the same location on the other side of the steering wheel. So it just pulls out of there, and then you got more access to work. The switch is located here. Coming out of the switch on top here, it's difficult to see because it's kind of a pretty rough, tight area to work in up here, but there's a green wire with a white stripe. We cut the green wire with the white stripe on the stoplight switch, and then we wired our supplemental braking system here in line with it. Then after we cut the green wire, you're now going to have two ends. Strip both of those ends back. One of those ends is going to be on the connector side, and the other end is going to be coming from further up top, from wherever it's coming from up top. So we're going to strip back each end. The connector end side, we're going to connect to the blue wire on our relay harness here. And it's hard to see, but on the other side of this blue wire and this butt connector, you can see the green wire with the white stripe, but you can also see the black wire. And that's from that monitor light wire that we routed to the front. That also needs to connect to this side. So here you can see the blue wire connects to the butt connector, and on the other side of the butt connector is the green and white wire that connects to our switch. There's also the black wire here. That's for the monitor light. That needs to connect on this side, on the switch side. Now the other wire that was up here where we had cut it, on the other half of the wire, it's right here. This connects to the black wire on your relay harness. And the way this will work is our switch is going to be in the normally closed position now. So the vehicle's going to operate exactly like normal. We really haven't even made a change, even though we've wired this in line. The way that this relay is going to activate, it's going to activate and open, removing this brake signal when you turn the headlights on in your motorhome. That's what we're going to be using as the trigger to deactivate the vehicle's stoplight circuit here. And here you can see the side of the relay. You've got your diagram on here so you know how it works. The blue wire is 87A, the black wire is 30, and the green wire is 87. We're not going to be using the green wire. We don't need it for anything. And you can see there that it is normally closed. Those two are normally contacted. When the relay energizes, it switches over and connects 30 to 87, which 87 is nothing, so it would deactivate the stoplight. 85 and 86 are the control side. When power is applied to one and ground is applied to the other, it doesn't matter which one, as long as you got power and ground on each of those, the relay energizes, and that's when it switches over from 87A to 87. So those wires are the red and the white. I don't remember which one's 86, which one's 85. They are labeled on the bottom, but again, it doesn't matter. As long as one's power and one's ground, it's going to work. We chose to use red for power and white for ground. So if you see these wires where they come down here, we use some of the extra wire from when we hooked into the diode lights, because you're going to have more excess than you need. So we took some of the brown and the white wire there from the diode wiring, extra wire, and we make that connection actually right here inside the vehicle. We can connect it right here to the one side before we pass down under the carpet. And all we did with this, since we're using the same colors of white and brown, we just like we attached into the diode wiring under the hood, we just spliced the white and the brown wires right into those same wires that are going underneath the hood where we spliced into the diode wiring. That way the white here is going to get its ground from the same point, and the brown, when they turn the taillights on, it's going to activate the relay. All right, so now that we've got the entire system installed here on our vehicle side, we can come back and we can go ahead and install that fuse now. We're ready to install it. So now we're going to pull our pin, and you should hear the system activate. If you don't, you might want to just open up the doors because it could be quiet depending on the location you've installed it. And our system's currently activating. It should be pulling our brake pedal, and when you push the pin back in, you should hear it release the air pressure. And here on the inside, you can see that the pedal is drawn towards the firewall when the system activates, applying the brake pedal. When we push the pin back in, you'll see it release. And that completes our installation of Roadmasters InvisiBrake supplemental braking system on our 2011 Jeep Patriot.